Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS DFIR webcast, Detecting Evil on Windows Systems, an in-depth look at the DFIR poster. My name is Benjamin White with the SANS Institute, and I'll be moderating this webcast. Today's featured speakers are Rob Lee, SANS Faculty Fellow, and Mike Pilkington, Senior Security Consultant. If you have any questions throughout the presentation, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface. We'll be answering them during the Q&A session at the end of the webcast. And with that, I'd like to hand the presentation over to Rob Lee.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Rob Lee. I'm the SANS Curriculum Lead for Digital Forensics and Incident Response. And my co-presenter today is Mike Pilkington, and he's going to be joining us here shortly. And we're both going to be presenting the SANS brand new Digital Forensics and Incident Response poster that we've titled the Finding Evil poster that we have at SANS. Really happy today. This is turning into a really nice spring day here in the DC area, for a couple of reasons. For those who know me, tonight I'm going to go see Captain America, the new movie that just is coming out with my wife, so I'm really excited about that. And then tomorrow is opening day for the Washington Nationals, and we're taking the kids out there to see that. So it's definitely, spring is kicking into high gear. And at the end of the weekend, I'm traveling down to SANS Orlando to begin teaching our Advanced Incident Response course down in the Magic Kingdom. So really, a lot of really fun things happening, for SANS and for me personally over the next couple of days. So I'm really excited about it. To kick things off, wanted to touch upon why the poster like this is important, because this is our second poster. We actually just got notification that we're in the process of creating a third poster, which is going to come out later this year as well. But these posters we've gotten a lot of great feedback on and find that they're very useful across many of our courses. I'm not going to go through our specific curriculum here, but it kind of gives you an outline of all of the courses that we have in the SANS Institute lineup. But I want to do a special shout out for some of our newer courses that are joining our ranks in 2014. Specifically in starting off with Forensics 526, which is our brand new memory analysis class. And a lot of cool things going on with this class. We have Jake Williams and Alyssa Torres who are heading up the authorship of this course right now and are doing an excellent job of creating a class that is aimed at the practitioners who need to be able to use memory forensics in an environment, whether they're looking for standard criminal type evidence or they're trying to use it for advanced intrusion investigations. Also want a special note to Forensics 572, our new Advanced Network Forensics class. This class is sold out not only at SANS Orlando, it just sold out in SANS Europe, Security Europe as well. And this class is headed up by Phil Hagan, who is an exceptional former United States Air Force trigger puller. Did trigger pulling since for cyber trigger pullers that are out there, and he does significant amount of work in making this class truly awesome. His co-author Steve Armstrong, Royal Air Force in the UK. This class is extremely popular, so if you're interested in this, I would definitely take a look at signing up later this year. And then we have Smartphone Forensics, brand new again this year, Forensics 585, headed up by our all-female author team, Heather Mahalik, Cindy Murphy, and Lee Krugnail. This class, again, is started off on a very strong footing, and it's going to be showing up at Security West next. That's going to be in early May. And, of course, our new debut class, which is in beta over the summer, which will be debuting in the fall, is our new Mac Forensics class, headed up by Sarah Edwards. Our San Jose class, by the way, from the second beta is not sold out yet, but it's close. You could take the class at half off if you sign up for one of the betas, because as long as you're okay with some of the scaffolding and be able to help out improve the class before we do the official launch, the betas are a good way to get a preview of the material before they head out. So we've gone from 4 classes over the past year into the total 9 classes from this year. So I certainly hope there's a lot of new things out there to potentially take from SANS. Also, down the left-hand side is a lot of free utilities and free information we have at SANS. So before we begin officially into how do we get the, about the poster in depth, I want to talk quickly about how do you get the poster. You could get it online in a PDF form, which makes it really easy for you to potentially see the inner details of it if you want to put up on your screen. But if you want something to post on your wall in your labs, in your security operations centers, or other locations, maybe in your bedroom, depending on how you roll, we have the link here, the dfir.to/get-find-evil poster. It is cap sensitive, so if you put it in there, there's a sign-up form online that you'd be able to go out and request a poster, and SANS will mail one to you over the next couple of weeks. So, if you want another copy or a couple extra copies, have yourself and someone else in your organization sign up, and you'll receive an actual paper copy of the actual poster. So a little bit of background on this poster. This actually is not, entirely, I'm not going to take 100% credit for the idea behind this poster, because actually the idea from it stemmed from our students in our courses. One of the biggest requests that we've had over the years when we go through incident response, we always discuss that hard-earned knowledge that a lot of incident responders have, specifically how do we know that SVC host, and how do we know that execution of certain programs on a system might end up being a trigger for potential compromise. So the biggest cheat sheet that we've ever been requested was we need a process list, we need a way to know what is good and what is potentially bad, specifically on Windows systems in an enterprise environment. So we've kind of toyed around this idea for a little bit. We actually had long discussions with Jason Fossen, he's the author of the Securing Windows track. He actually has a talk called Process Hacker that kind of steps an individual through the Windows processes. But even with that talk, people still wanted a more in-depth cheat sheet. So went to the individuals on our authorship for the courses and found that Mike's background and knowledge was perfect in order to get him rolling on creating a poster like this. And just as a side note, while we are literally in our first draft with this poster, I want to give a shout out to Patrick Olson, who also released a blog article in a very similar way of, what is the Windows services, what is good, what is bad. And it was funny, when he released his blog article, I sent him a draft of our poster saying, hey, great minds think alike. And Patrick kind of laughed because, we were kind of moving toward the same direction. And he actually helped contribute to this poster and helped us, make it better by commenting on what he would add, what he would take away, and he helped edit the overall poster to begin with. So what we're going to do here in this presentation is kind of go through both sides of this poster of the knowing normal, how do you find evil by knowing what is normal, and then the opposite side of the knowing abnormal. How do you use artifacts on a system to potentially say this is not right, this should not be there, and it might be a trigger for a much more interesting situation, and it could be an indicator that it is a definitive compromise. So I'm going to pass it off to my co-presenter, Mike. He's going to kick us off with the, let me see if, went too far, no normal find evil side. So Mike, all yours.
Awesome, thanks Rob. Well, I want to go through what we consider side one here, which is actually, if you've downloaded the PDF, you'll notice it's the second page of the PDF. But this is really the core of what we focused on initially, and like Rob said, we wanted to provide something to the community, but specifically to our students as well who had been asking for this, is the ability to see what's normal, and in particular this is on a process level, but see what's normal on a Windows system so that the abnormal can bubble up. And so this is what we came up with. What we're showing on the slide there, and like I said, this is our main page for the poster, is the Process Hacker tool, and this is an open source version of Process Explorer from SysInternals. But it's actually running a default installation of Windows 7, and all we did was fire up Windows 7 Enterprise and log on and start Internet Explorer. So you actually do see Internet Explorer at the bottom, and we've got one little box on Internet Explorer and how it kind of behaves and things like that. But the overall idea is to point out the key characteristics of these processes that are typically running on a Windows system. So things like, what is the proper legitimate, what is the proper image path for legitimate processes? So where's the process executable found? What are the normal parent processes for these processes? And relative start time. So if we, most of these that we're showing are going to start at boot or very quickly after boot. And so if you start to see a process that looks like it's legitimate, but it's got an unusual process start time, or it starts well after boot, it might kind of raise a flag. Also, what are the user accounts that are typical for these processes? So these are the things that we wanted to highlight, and at a large level, that's what we're showing here. As we have on the bottom left here of the screen, let me make sure my mouse is working. I want to go ahead and mention again, as Rob said, Jason Fossen's talk on a process hacker. Actually, I think the title is Exploratory Surgery with Process Hacker. It's a wonderful presentation. If you get a chance to see him, you got to definitely go check him out, because he's got a lot of energy and is pretty funny in presenting this information. He does a great job presenting, which is it's kind of sometimes hard to present this low-level information. But he's also written it up really well. He's got it very well documented, so definitely check out this link and his PDF. So let's see. Okay, so actually I'm going to go back one and just show you. At the top there's where this blue, and what we're going to be showing is mostly screenshots from the poster and just kind of diving into each one of them. But at the top is this, this blue box, where what we wanted to do is give you kind of a checklist of things to look through as you're trying to spot the anomalies. What we're looking for, and when you think about what malware is doing, malware wants to hide. It doesn't want to be found. And so there's typically two ways that it's going to try to hide. It's either going to just try to blend in and look normal, just kind of hide in plain sight, or it's going to try to do more stealthy techniques and not even be found within a normal process listing or things like that. So that's more into the code injection and rootkit technology, which we'll talk about in a later slide, and we've got a little bit of information on it on the other page. But when we're looking for things that are hiding in plain sight, they're just trying to blend in, these are the types of characteristics we want to look for to help us kind of bubble up the things that are not normal. So we want to understand what the proper, for example, the proper parent process is for these normal Windows processes, and that way we can look for ones that are not in the proper parent process. We want to look for, I'll just kind of go through the list here, look for processes that are in the wrong path, for example. Like I said, the wrong parent process, that are misspelled, so that's very common. So we see that a lot with VC host and LSASS and others. Maybe running under the wrong user account, so that's definitely something to keep in mind. Unusual start times, unusual command line arguments, and then packed executables as well. And this is one that bubbles up particularly with when we're looking at a live system, and we can use something like Process Explorer. It really highlights packed processes for us. So this is kind of the checklist we go through, where we're trying to find the anomalies, and if we know what's normal, we can easily spot these potential malicious processes. All right, so what we're going to do is dig into a few of these. I'm going to start out with SCV host. This is undoubtedly malware's favorite target. And one of the reasons is because there's just so many of them. And again, what we're showing here on the left is a typical default installation of Windows 7. And when you fire up a default installation of Windows 7, there's 10 instances of SVC host. I always have to catch myself because I end up saying it the wrong way. SVC host, service host. Now you may ask, why are there so many of these? And basically it boils down to a decision, kind of a balancing act that Microsoft is making between performance and stability versus system resource usage. So the idea is, well, on a default installation of Windows, there's almost 150 services. Now, most of those are disabled, only about 50 of them are running, but still that's 50 services that are running by default. Many of these are actually have their code coded as a DLL, and that DLL is running within one of these service hosts. And the idea is Microsoft, they could have each one of the processes be its own service that, or sorry, each one of the services be its own process. That's completely possible. But there's a certain amount of overhead that goes with each process. So basically what they do is they try to group them up and find the right balance between the right privilege levels and the right number of services per service host. So essentially they're trying to help speed up the system, help minimize the resources and the drag on the overall workstation. So that's why there's a bunch of them. Now, of course, malware looks at this and says, well, what's one more? You know, if we just add another one, people aren't going to notice. So typically what malware is going to do is it's either going to misspell it slightly, which I keep doing by accident, and they'll misspell it to SCV host instead of SVC host, or they may spell it SVC host, but they put it in different paths. So it couldn't reside in system 32 where the legitimate one is because they can't have the same name, but it might be found in the Windows directory, for example. So that's where you'll often find this. But then also just keep in mind, and I'll talk about this a little bit later too, that services or malware is going to legitimately use services as well, and specifically for persistence mechanisms. And it might be that the legitimate malware is found within one of these real instances as VC host. So we're actually going to break down a service here in a little bit and see what that looks like. All right, so let's look at another one, and this one's really interesting. Again, it's CSRSS. This is the client-server runtime subsystem. It's another one that's kind of commonly targeted by malware because it's found on all instances of Windows, and so admins and other people who, you know, techies see it and recognize it. It's another one where they might simply just, you know, add slightly misspell it by adding an S or moving an S or something along those lines. There's typically two instances of CSRSS. The first is for session 0, where the service is run, and the second is for the interactive console session, which is session 1. Now there can be multiple sessions, so if someone's logged in with remote desktop, then that can create a new session, and that would create a new CSRSS. But typically on most workstations you're going to find just 2. So a little bit of history too, so this is kind of neat for 2 reasons. One is because, you know, it's something that you want to look for and spot anomalies that maybe there's an extra instance and it's spelled wrong or something along those lines. But from an advanced malware perspective, an advanced attacker perspective, CSRSS is interesting because it actually is responsible for drawing the command prompt window. Going back historically, it actually had a lot more duties and it was overall kind of an overarching process for managing the windows on the desktop. Much of that's been deprecated, and now actually with Windows XP in 2003, it really was just responsible for the command window. And with Windows 7, that's even been further deprecated, and now conhost, which is a child process of CSRSS, conhost is now the one that's responsible for drawing that command window. But what's really cool about it is when you've got an attacker that's interactively on that system and running commands on that system within a command shell, those commands have to be stored in this process. And again, depending on which version it is, if it's Windows 7 or 2008 R2, that's going to be conhost. Older versions are going to be CSRSS. But it turns out that we can analyze the memory of these processes and see the commands that someone's run within the command shell. And so what we've got here is just a little example of this. Now, typically what you're going to do is use memory forensics to kind of dig out this information. You could either, you know, there's a nice plugin from Volatility. Even just old-fashioned string search can be really useful in this case against the memory image. But what I'm doing is just showing a live instance and a quick demonstration here of how this works. This is using the SysInternals tool VMMap, which will allow you to basically view the memory of a running process. And so at the top left here, I've attached to the conhost process, and I'm specifically looking at the heap for this instance of conhost. And you have to dig around. There's a lot of information in here, and it's kind of organized. Well, the organization's not easy to find, but at any rate, the data's in here. The data's in here for the commands that were typed into the console for this particular running process. So I just want to point out a few things here. Right at the kind of in the middle here, we've got the administrator command prompt, which is actually the title for this this command CMD window. And then also, you see multiple, what I'm showing in the command window is the DOS key/history. So these are the commands, the last, I think it does 30 commands, but I'm not positive. At any rate, this shows a number of commands that I had run in this command window. And a few of them are popping up within the heap, within this small section of the heap that I'm looking at. So ipconfig/all and ipconfig is showing up. Also, this SC command, which I'll talk about a little bit later, this is a great command for querying the configuration of running services, as well as actually services that are stopped. But at any rate, what I did here is I ran SC query EX, which is like an extended query, on the wsearch service. And what's really cool about this one is we're seeing that, okay, yeah, this is what I ran in the command window, and you can see it up in the top right. But also you see the return data. So this is what this command actually returned back to me. So again, this is really a neat feature that's an artifact that's useful, and if you get to a machine quickly enough, you have a great chance, and you're getting a memory image, you've got a great chance of pulling out this data. So,
hey Mike, can I add something to that?
Oh, sure.
Let me go back one slide, thanks.
There we go.
So on the on this piece of information here, I really want to point out, and this is Rob Lee who's speaking right now. This is a very interesting artifact, and over the years that I've done casework, we've found a ton of useful information in here, and I want to specifically talk about in regards to finding strings in these processes. There's a great tool within Volatility that allows you to do the extraction of a lot of these elements. But one of the things that I found is that that tool often misses many of them too. And I think that if you're doing memory analysis and you're doing extraction of this data or dumping it from the process itself, you have to be really careful that sometimes an over-reliance on the tools. And I actually teach this in 508, and I know they go into it in our memory forensics class too, even more so, that if you don't actually do the strings extraction manually, there's still a tendency for you to potentially miss additional keystrokes that the attacker came in and typed on the system. And so just, we actually have several demos of that in the classes, and we're really not trying to, say, hey, Volatility is, a poor tool or anything, but it, like with any tool, and over-reliance on that as a, the only thing that you'll check for, you end up missing some of those key artifacts. For example, in one of the previous courses I just taught, I was teaching someone who's actually extremely experienced that actually used to work in the at Terramark with the Volatility team. And one of the things that he found, and he's very known in Volatility, and I said, well, notice here if you do strings against it, you actually get more data out, and especially when he started seeing that, he went back to one of his cases in class and went back and literally did a fist punch in the air when he saw key data for that case that he'd be missing, simply because he wasn't doing strings against it and mainly just using the over-reliance on the tool. So I want to make sure that this one specifically, people actually still go down to the old school technique. I know it seems old school, but it really is going to pay off for you to do an additional check to make sure there's no additional strings that you might be missing or command line input that you might be missing from these two processes. I'll hand it back to Mike at this point.
Okay, thanks, Rob. Great point. All right, so we're going to look at a couple more processes, and so this next one is LSASS, another commonly targeted command. It's not spelled LSSAS or LSASSS, but you'll see this often, and as you do more malware analysis. The thing about the LSASS process is it's extremely important to the Windows system. Among its many duties, one of the primary ones is that it handles account authentication. It also handles password policy enforcement and even writing to the event log. Now, because it's very common it's common to all Windows hosts, malware does often target it. Now, one of the more interesting pieces of malware that's targeted LSASS in the past was the Stuxnet worm, a true nation-state piece of malware. And it actually did something interesting. It uses a technique called process hollowing, which we'll talk about a little bit more here shortly when we talk about code injection. But basically, it actually starts up a legitimate instance of LSASS. It takes out the legitimate code and shoves in its malicious code, and then continues to run LSASS, and it tricks the Windows system. But the one thing that really stood out with this particular piece of malware is that it actually invoked multiple instances. So one of the main markers here that you want to really focus in on is that there should always only be one running instance of LSASS. So Rob, I think you were going to talk some to Explore.
Yeah, Explorer.exe is one of the processes that specifically a lot of people assume that it's in Windows System 32, but in fact it's not. Explorer.exe is one of the processes that has the deep history of being one of the first exploited processes for the DLL search order hijacking. And basically what that does is that an executable process that loads DLLs initially will look in the present working directory, in this case in the Windows directory where Explorer would be found, before it switches over to Windows System 32. So bad guys, exploit processes like Explorer by putting rogue DLLs into the same directory that would load them before the official DLL is found in Windows System 32. So this is, one of those that, Explorer basically runs the desktop and obviously is the main GUI interface for the users. But it's exploited because of the fact that in some cases it's not exactly found in the standard Windows System 32 directory, and as a result, if there's access control lists or specific monitoring of the System 32 environment by a lot of external processes and whitelisting and so forth, they might miss that someone could still get around that by doing the DLL hijacking, dropping the DLLs into the Windows path, and then when the individual user logs on the system, the Trojanized DLLs would then be loaded into Explorer. And so it's a really, crafty trick. And when our team at Mandiant, when I was working there, initially found this, they spent, I think it was about 24 hours, trying to figure out how the process was being loaded. They knew that the rogue process was being loaded. They just couldn't figure out how it was achieving its persistence. But Explorer.exe is one of those that, because it's not in the core Windows System 32 directory location, was initially targeted by our bad guys for this. There's other examples since that point, but it has that notoriety that's associated with it. Mike, do you have any additional comments on this before I switch over to the abnormal side?
No, I'll let you move on.
Sweet. All right. So in the next phase here, we're going to switch over to talking about some of the artifacts that we consider that are defined on a standard Windows system in an enterprise. Now, I need to do a caveat here. One of the assumptions that we're going to make, a broad assumption, is that these are on standard workstations. Standard users, not high-end users, not technical users, not power users environments. So you're thinking that your standard this is 90% of the majority of the systems in your enterprise are going to be your standard users who have probably never dropped to a command prompt. If you said anything about the Windows registry, they would look at you blankly. They're primarily using web, Office documents, email, and more. And so, unless they're, doing coding, unless they're, a power user, typically they're not going to be, utilizing the system the way you and I probably are going to utilize a standard Windows machine. Now, who would this entail? Obviously HR, potentially anyone in finance, anyone on the executive side are typically probably not doing that. Again, a lot of these users are highly targeted by our adversaries. Obviously, our system administrators are also targeted by our adversaries, and it'll be hard to differentiate a system admin from adversary type impact. But if you start looking at your standard systems, a lot of these artifacts are going to be found as anomalies because of the fact that these normal people just will not create the similar artifacts that an adversary would when you start taking a look at it. So let's dive into a couple of these, and we start with the unusual OS artifacts. This was often a often requested list while we were going through our advanced incident response courses at SANS 508 in 526, that we would notice that a lot of the artifacts are generally created when you have a power user or sysadmin on a system. But a lot of those systems are not managed with the administrator actually going out and touching them. Usually the administrator is using group policy to do updating of these machines and will not be, equivalent to using a scalpel or going out and manually upgrading a system or touching it remotely. So when you start taking a look at some of these artifacts, initially it's kind of striking when you end up doing so, because you're saying, what is the likelihood that a user in HR is going to drop to a command prompt and start doing things? So for example, if you see cmd.exe execution, on most systems that are non-system administrators, this is an extremely rare occurrence. You would see adversaries drop to it all the time because they're using their shells, they're using the backdoor, the malware, or even they're trying to install processes or services on the system. But again, the typical execution of this, it would cause my eyebrow, the Spock eyebrow, to go up just a little bit if it were it was a standard user in your enterprise environment. How do you prove execution, though? If you go back to our first poster, the evidence of chart, you would actually be able to show evidence of command line execution. For example, looking for the prefetch files associated with it, user assist keys, the shimcast, jump lists, and others that would be able to show that this process was actually executed. Another one that is really interesting is the you just don't see the standard users dropping to a command prompt and then running the net command, for example, which attaches to remote system share. Now, the net command in of itself is an easy way for an adversary to connect to a remote system and be able to access their remote share. Again, that would be in a logon, a type 3 event, a network-based logon, which again, normal users simply would only be doing if they're using Explorer to attach to someone else's machine. So you could actually differentiate from an adversarial type attachment to a remote system in your environment versus the standard user by seeing how they actually go about doing it. Typically, Explorer is not going to invoke net.exe execution. That would be someone from the command prompt. Now, immediately following that execution, you would see them attached to a remote share of a system. They'll upload their malware to the other system and then execute it. How would they do that? Well, again, you would see additional two artifacts on here, at.exe execution. Now, typically, only scheduled tasks are going to be executed, but whenever you see a scheduled task being executed from a non-system administrator machine to another non-system administrator machine, that would be something that would, again, cause a Spock eyebrow to go up a little bit and saying, why would that user drop to a command prompt, run at.exe from one system to another? Again, enough of it is rare in these environments, you just typically don't see it. So another way to do that is that they execute psexec, which leaves residue in the registry in addition to the prefetch files, the shim cache, and more. And psexec, just the fact that it's being executed, in many cases will actually start a service on the remote machine, which also leaves its own trail behind. So there's a lot of these little artifacts that we potentially see that when you take a step back and you think about it from a system administrator perspective, that the standard users are simply not going to do. And if you see these executions or the existence of these programs on a system in any way, then that would potentially be an indicator that something weird is going on and potentially warrants further investigation. Now, as I said before, a lot of this stuff is very gray area. It's not black and white. You might have legitimate usage of some of these. However, it is more rare on your non-power user, non-system administrator type systems. Mike, cool. You want to throw something else in that?
Yeah, I actually wanted to just kind of hit on one of the ones I think is really interesting too, is this use of SysInternals tools right in the middle. I think it's the fourth bullet. There's the psexec, pslogdon, and procdump are the three that we pointed out. Psexec is not a surprise. It's been used for a long time. It's used by admins legitimately many times, but it's also used by attackers to remotely run commands, and we've seen that and talked about it quite a bit. pslogdon, if you haven't come across this is a way that attackers look for systems in the environment that have interactive logons, and they're basically able to scan the environment if they have the right credentials to query the remote machine, but they're able to determine who's interactively logged on to the machine. And as they get to know your environment and get to know who are the people and what are the accounts that have a lot of privileges, it's an easy way for them to figure out, I need to go after this machine and that user on this machine. And with an interactive logon comes the user's credentials, both the password and the password hash. The actual password and the password hash are stored in LSASS that we talked about earlier. And a great way to get that from an attacker standpoint now is to use ProcDump, which is another Microsoft SysInternals tool. It's signed by Microsoft. Most AV systems and most admins wouldn't even notice it. But they can use ProcDump to essentially just do a dump of the memory for LSASS that's got all those credentials in it. Then they pull it back to their system and run the tool Mimikatz, which will just present them with the user's password, as well as password hash. So I think those are really interesting because it basically gives a full gamut of how a user can target and attack and gain credentials within an environment. And they're all signed by Microsoft. They're all tools that are used by admins and not often flagged by AV. I guess one other point I had, and this is really just a side note, but there was an interesting email thread that went through the DFIR mailing list recently about this book, RTFM, Red Team, I was thinking the other RTFM, Red Team Field Manual. And it is basically I don't know how many book pages, probably about 90 pages or so of just a massive cheat sheet from a pen tester that's been been in the business for 10 years or so. It's a really good book. I actually just got it in the mail 3 days ago and just spent the entire night kind of combing through it. A lot of stuff like these commands you're seeing here are talked about. It's no frills. It's basically, like I say, it's kind of a cheat sheet with just a one-liner with the command and just a simple explanation, very simple explanation of what it does. But it's $9 on Amazon. Might be worth checking out. I liked it a lot, and gives you some good ideas of things that the attackers are doing and things that you can look for from a forensic standpoint. All right, so let's move on and talk about code injection and rootkit behavior. So, in 3 minutes or so that I have, there's only a certain amount of depth we can get into, but we want to just kind of highlight it here and discuss it in the sense that this is the other technique, really the other of the two primary techniques for hiding malware. The other one is code injection and rootkit behavior, and this is really ways that that the malware can become stealth and hide behind the scenes. Now, there's basically between the two here, we've got code injection, which is relatively easy way to run malicious code within a legitimate process. So I talked about one of the techniques, which is process hollowing. That's what Stuxnet did with LSASS, where it just ripped out the legitimate code and put its code in the process itself. The other one that's probably more common and easier really is a DLL injection. So it'll just use basically API functions that are available within Windows to inject a DLL into a running process. And you'll see this with lots and lots of different pieces of malware because it's simple, it's stable, and it's effective. So, I mean, why not use it? Now, rootkits actually are very effective as well, but they're more difficult to implement because now you're getting into the kernel level of the operating system. And so you have to have a malware author that's familiar with basically device driver programming so that they can create one that's not only effective but stable, because if it's not stable, it can easily blue screen the machine and not only be detected, but a blue screen machine is probably not going to help the attacker that much in most cases. So rootkits are important and they're something we need to be aware of, but they're not as common as the code injection techniques. So really for both of these, this is where the stealth comes in. It's not hiding in plain sight. It's not that you can just look through a process list and detect it. In fact, most of our tools are not going to detect either of these methods. So this is really where memory analysis really shines and allows us to look beneath the covers and see what's actually going on at the operating system level. Now, there are a couple of tools that we've mentioned here, Rootkit Revealer and Gummer. So those are both tools that basically do sort of what we do in memory analysis, where they look at both what the operating system is telling us is running on the machine, as well as looking at it at a lower level and basically doing a diff. And if there is a difference, then it reports it, and often that's what is actually hiding from us. So those are two tools you might run on a running machine, but really memory analysis is where you want to look. So, Rob, I think you were going to have some thoughts on this guy.
Yeah, and just to going back one slide, to finalize the discussion on code injection. You just mentioned memory analysis, and how important it is, and how it's now become, a staple in any incident response team. A lot of people, when I initially talk to them about code injection rootkit behavior, they give that blank stare. They're like, well, I'm not a coder. And granted, a lot of people feel that you need to be at a coding level, or you need to be like somehow, coding plugins for the variety of tools that are out there. And honestly, you don't. One of the things that we're really trying to aim at in the standard incident response classes that we offer at SANS, and I know they go into it, a lot in the brand new 526 class with Jake Williams and Alyssa Torres for memory analysis. It's really aiming at a practitioner level, so that a practitioner who's doing a lot of the investigations can fly into a system, immediately be able to identify where there's rootkit behavior and code injection, and you don't need to be able to understand, debugging, or you don't need to use, be an expert IDA Pro in order to be able to make that happen. Now, granted, that does help. I will tell you that you'll be a lot better off if you have that. But for those of you who are kind of like worried about, hey, memory analysis is a step beyond my capabilities, I'd highly recommend taking a look at some of our recent courses coming out, specifically the memory analysis one, just to see how that will potentially pertain to you in your own environment, really aimed at the practitioner side. Diving into the next slide, talking about network activity. This is another one that a lot of people, tend to, when they dump network activity out, and they have this bewildered look on their face, like, well, how do I know what I should be looking at? How do I know what's legitimate? How do I know what's not legitimate? And so I created this rule list as a way to potentially help them out in identifying things that, would cause my eyeballs to attract to that process. Because you can have a lot of network connections, and you're saying, well, they're all meaningless to me. Maybe do I need to look up on who is every IP address that I see, look up every socket? And the answer to that question is no. And part of the reason why is truly understanding how the adversaries are communicating out of your environment. Because it's fairly noticeable by the network operations centers and security operations centers, anything that is not a port 80 activity, which is web, it tends to draw their eyeballs to it. So what our adversaries do is that they tend to hide in the large amount of traffic that's web-based that is leaving your environment. So one of the first things that I tell individuals when you're looking at a host system, something that draw my eyeballs is any process communicating over port 80, 443, or 8080, or any of the, to the traditional browser ports, that is not a browser. Now, having said that, there's obviously, updates and other processes that will do it, but you would be able to quickly investigate, interrogate those processes, and determine that that's normal activity. But you would also notice immediately that why is Explorer.exe communicating over port 80? That would be something that should stop you in saying that's not right. It should be Firefox. It should be Chrome. It should be something that should be a legitimate browser-based type of connection out of your environment. And when you see, especially a traditional Windows process like SVC host communicating over browser port, that should stop you in your tracks and saying that's wrong, that's evil. We now have seen, we can see you now. Now, the opposite side of this is when you see Internet Explorer or any of the browsers not communicating over one of their traditional ports. This could be an indicator that someone might overlook it, i.e. Explorer process or Firefox process, and assume, well, that's a normal process of the user, and all of a sudden it's communicating and doing RDP connections in your environment, a 2389 or something like that. There's no way that it would probably be doing that. Maybe there's a plugin out there that has RDP backend or something to it on Firefox or Chrome, but you'd probably be able to investigate that fairly quickly. The other thing that you see is, take note of what are the traditional, connections in your environment. For example, if you're an environment that offers a remote desktop to home users, more likely than not, they're coming in through a concentrator of some point. So majority of the traffic originating for 3389 is going to originate from that single location. When you have, Joe and HR system connect to RDP to the CFO system, that should cause the network operations center and security operations centers, eyebrows to go up a little bit, saying that would be weird. why would RDP traffic originate from a system that traditionally does not do RDP internal to your environment? Sysadmin systems and even the power user systems are probably exceptions to this rule, as they potentially need to go do fixing on the network. But even then, you would see that those systems are traditionally clustered around the same location and are not like, Joe and HR communicating with the executive systems in the CFO system altogether. So this is just a couple of the ones that I typically tell people about, take a look at. And when you start, just using these simple rules, you'll immediately see processes that are not legitimate, that are trying to communicate and hide in normal web traffic, that simply you would see them as suspicious, and you even dump it from memory and look at residual network connections and still see those identifiers. This is something that would potentially stick out and saying, that is odd, I need to investigate that a little bit more.
Awesome. All right, well, let's talk about services once again. We hit on SVC hosts specifically earlier because it is so commonly targeted by malware, just to try to blend in. But the fact is malware often uses services for the persistence mechanism, whether it's named SVC host or not. It wants to install itself as a service so that it's available upon boot. So it's one of the two most common. The other very common mechanism is to use one of the run keys within the registry. But in most investigations, you want to take a close look at the services and see what's there and what's running. So what we've got here is some ideas about how to investigate that service, or the list of services that are on the system. On a dead box, you're going to have to look at the registry. So right there in the middle is the registry location, HQLM system, current control set services. And all the services, and in fact drivers, are actually the configuration information within these keys. On a live system, you can actually use the SC command, which is really robust. It has a lot of different arguments you can use to get more information. So the extended query, the regular query. QC is the configuration information that talks about the path to the executable and any arguments you give the executable. Privileges, and then the Q trigger info. So this trigger info is kind of interesting because it turns out that while most services are going to start at boot, it doesn't have to. It actually can start based on a trigger. And so let's take a look at an example of one of these. Now, most default services in Windows just start at boot, or actually are even disabled. Very few of them actually use a trigger to start, but it is possible, and there are some that do. This is one example of a service that's built into Windows that starts upon a trigger. And we'll just start with that and look towards the bottom here, using specifically the SC command trigger info on W32 time. This is the Windows time service. It gets started once a machine is joined to the domain. So we're seeing over here on the right, a domain join event or trigger is what starts this service. And then when this system leaves the domain, if it's taken off the domain, it actually stops the service. So all of that trigger information is within this trigger info key. It's not nearly as nicely spelled out for us here as what it does. But it turns out there's a lot of different triggers that could start and stop a service, from devices being connected or disconnected, firewall events, group policy changes, network IP availability is kind of a common one, and custom events as well. Mark Baggett actually did a pretty interesting blog article, or actually series of blogs, over on the Internet Storm Center site. And if you look up Mark Baggett and stealthy persistence, you'll find this one and quite a few others he documented. But one idea he came up with is, because you can create these custom triggers, is what if you had a trigger to where a certain wireless network became in range of the victim, and then the malware or the service, the malicious service, would start up. So kind of neat. Not something you probably have to worry about too much, but just be aware that it's there. But services in general are definitely something you need to pay close attention to. Just kind of going over a few of the highlights here towards the top. Within the registry, if you're looking at a particular service, the main key here is going to have quite a few values of interest. In this particular case, it's actually the executable that runs the code is SVC host with the -K, so it's in this group called local service, and that's a very common grouping for SVC host. we have some of the more common groups, which is designated with this -K, listed on the poster. And then within the parameters here, you've got the actual service DLL that's used. So this is the real code that runs this particular service. It's system root system32 W32 time. So if you got a suspicious service that you're not aware of, and you know, think it might be malicious, you can check the digital certificates or check the digital signatures to make sure it's signed and from a legitimate source, and kind of continue with your investigation from there.
All right, for the evidence persistence, I'm not going to. This could be its own discussion in of itself, but you know, it goes without saying that being able to survive a reboot is incredibly important when you are an adversary attacking a system in an enterprise. So these are just some of the areas that we typically see our adversaries try to take advantage of. And from the low end, going to the out-of-start registry keys, you know, from the higher end. You know, modifying local group policy, the Microsoft Office add-in, BIOS flashing even, and others. This is, you know, it really does, you know, take a little bit more knowledge out there to potentially identify these. In most cases, you potentially need to go into more of a, you know, examination of how you determine if something's malware or not. We have that on our first poster, you know, using the malware funneling capabilities. But this is, again, you know, if you're going to survive reboot, you know, you're going to see some of the traditional locations. And our adversaries are going to typically use the lowest capable method that will succeed, because in most environments, they're going to be able to remain persistent for months until they're finally detected. And then they start to use more of the advanced capabilities later on because they like to hold those in reserve. But, you know, the scheduled tasks, the service replacement, service creation, going back in and seeing that, you know, as we talked about earlier, modifying the SC command or using that SC command and other artifacts like that are things that we potentially try to identify. And a lot of the tools out there are using, you know, access status FTK, you know, all the way down to, you know, Mark Loans, Auto Runner, and others will allow you to go, you know, look for a lot of that evidence manually. You know, even if you're, you know, traditional forensicator all the way up to, you know, using enterprise capabilities. To be able to pull a lot of this data off the systems. So I want to hand back to Mike to close out, and then we'll open it up for questions. And again, one of the questions we had is, how do you get the poster? Here's the link, and this is the to order it online. One note, I already saw one of the questions out there asked specifically about if you're overseas, how do you receive the poster? Unfortunately, SANS is only doing this for its United States mail. If you're looking at getting the poster, a physical copy of the poster overseas, any of the SANS events in Asia or in Europe are where the forensics class is running. We're going to be sending a ton of these there, so you can always pick one up at that location. Being able to send out 100 of these, you know, because of just the way, you know, snail mail works at this point, is just not possible. Now, if you do want to contact me and receive permission from your printer to you know, print it locally, you could do that as well. We don't mind, you know, as long as you're not taking it and, you know, removing all of our stuff from it and it becomes your poster instead. But, you know, we will allow you to print your own posters if you want to go to a professional poster printing place with the PDF and do so. We know people have created big versions of the poster that way. In some cases, the poster, who is going to print the poster might need to talk to us. And if you just, you know, CC them on the email, we'll send back and we'll say permission granted, that kind of thing. We'd be able to do that. So I do apologize for those overseas who are hoping to get a physical copy of it. But for now, this is only U.S. only.
Okay, well, I think, let's see, I can take over. There we go. I mean, that basically wraps up the formal part of the presentation. We'll have some Q&A hopefully here in a second. Just want to say thanks for joining. Also, you know, hopefully this is helpful to you. I think it's going to really be helpful to our students. Like Rob's mentioned, they've been asking for it, and I think it's really going to help clarify some of the exercises we do in our Forensics 508 class, as well as actually 610 and, of course, 526, which is the Memory in Depth class. They're all going to find this poster really useful for digging through and tons of processes and trying to find the needle in the haystack. So I'll leave it at that. I think Ben will probably chime in here and see if we have any questions.
Thanks, Mike. Yeah, we do have some questions that have built up here. I guess I'll just jump right into them. One question we had was, a couple times it was observed that Explorer.exe was also seen as a sentence case, Explorer.exe. Why does it change to sentence case, or which scenario does it change? This was particularly seen in the case of Mariposa.
Can you, I'm sorry to ask you this, I had to turn up my volume there. Can you repeat it one more time?
Sure. One question. A couple of times it was observed that Explorer.exe is also seen as a sentence case, Explorer.exe. Why does it change to sentence case, or which scenario does it change? This was particularly seen in the case of Mariposa.
I can tell you two possibilities here that I can think of. One is there's something wrong with it, so it could be have this process hollowing technique that happened with LSASS, so that it actually is a legitimate instance of Explorer, but yet the legitimate code's been ripped out and the Mariposa code was put in. So that's a possibility. It could be slightly misnamed, or in the wrong location. It could be the right name, but the path is in the wrong location. The other possibility is that there can be multiple instances of Explorer.exe running on a system. That's probably not what's going on here, based on the fact that this is the analysis of Mariposa. But you can have multiple instances, and that is when you have multiple interactive logons. So if someone has performed a fast user switching and done another interactive logon with a different account, so you have two interactive logons, or remote desktop is the other common time when you'll see two instances of Explorer.exe.
Okay. We have another question here. It's about unusual artifacts. Seem to recall seeing browsers running net.exe in the background. Have you noticed this?
I have not.
I've not noticed that, no. No, I've not.
That sounds pretty interesting. I wonder if, when you said the background, I'm wondering if it's a child process of the browser. If so, that seems really interesting. No, I haven't seen that and would not expect that.
Okay. Mike, you referenced a book earlier. Could you possibly give us the title of that one again, and maybe where we can find it?
Yes, for sure. It's called RTFM, for Red Team Field Manual. It's sold on Amazon. It's only $9. I think it was self-published. So it's worth $9 for sure, in my opinion. And it's a really neat, kind of handy, massive cheat sheet, essentially, is what it is. So RTFM, Red Team Field Manual.
Yeah, I echo Mike's comment on the RTFM manual. I just picked mine up, and for as cheap as it is, it's a really nice little handy manual. However, the only thing I would recommend is that it'd be really nice if this were in electronic form too, because having this, something so small on your iPad or Kindle or something like that to be able to quickly browse through would be especially nice. I think they're trying to figure out if they're going to release it online or not, but in a PDF version of it. But it basically has everything that you would find on MSDN and SysInternals website, and how potential attackers might use it. For example, one of the biggest ones I saw in there, which was really nice, was how to use Mimikatz. I mean, having running Mimikatz and then do the git log on, do the inject it into the LSASS, the exact commands you had to type in order to drop your passwords in plain text. There's only like 3 commands there, but I can't tell you the amount of times I always had to look that up in order to remember what is that sequence again, and I had to go back in there and do it, because the tool's in French, and there's unless you read French, it's not something that is going to be entirely apparent to you when you're using it. So RTFM is well worth the $9 that you get off of it.
All right, looks like we might have time for one more question here. The question is, since Malwarebytes is a staple in many operations environments, does code injection and rootkit techniques get identified, or does it require manual memory analysis or techniques and tools?
I would say Malwarebytes is pretty effective. That's probably another one. It's not designed necessarily, just for rootkits by any means. It's signature-based, and there's a lot of different signatures that a rootkit or certainly a code injection could leave behind, besides just the fact that it's injecting code. So I'd say it's still an effective tool, and actually it's certainly one of the best out there, but it's not as effective as doing memory analysis, because that's the truth. So that's where the code has to run. If it may try to hide, but it has to run, and when it's running in memory. So that's getting at the root of the problem.
All right.
Yeah, I tend to agree. With Mike, the problem with a lot of AV tools that are out there, even the good ones, Malwarebytes, Kaspersky and others that do a lot more inspection of like weird things going on in RAM, is you still potentially need to have something that interrogates memory. Now, one of the biggest things that I see the downfall of the memory analysis community right now is that you almost need to image RAM and then be able to then inspect it. So capabilities that scale are few and far between that allow you to do memory inspection across hundreds of systems without having to first dump a memory image and then examine it. So tools like Mandiant's Mirror is a good example, but also using it on on the low end side, if you want to use FResponse and others to be able to do that scalability is quite useful. There's a really good utility written by Michael Cohen, which I'm not sure a lot of people have seen, called WinPMem, which will allow you to get direct access to RAM on a running Windows system, so you can then still run your memory analysis tools against it, even on a live host. Redline also has that kind of capability, but it really isn't scalable. So one thing that I see a lot of people saying, hey, I want to do memory analysis, but in an enterprise environment, it's becoming more and more difficult. Well, it's not becoming. It is difficult right now. So I imagine over the next few years, as more vendors get into this space, that you're going to see a lot more scalable solutions for a lot cheaper price start coming out, which will allow, even the AV community might start getting into this a little bit. Since they're already running on the system, all they have to do is connect into RAM in order to run some of this. But because it's not something that you'd want to do routinely, because there's a lot of process background stuff that you have to do on these agents, it's still something that I'm expecting the community to respond either with commercial capabilities or others. We just got to the point where we could at least see it a lot better than we have ever done. But now we need to get it back into more of the operational. How do we actually use this in an enterprise environment, so we don't have to download 1,000 memory images just so we could do code injection inspection? As we could say, as Mike and I pointed out here, if you could detect it, it's great. But if you have 10,000 hosts in your enterprise, you can't do code injection via memory analysis on every single one of those without some additional help.
All right, great. I think we are just out of time now. I'd like to thank Mike and Rob Lee both for your great presentations, and a special thanks to our audience for listening in today. We greatly appreciate it. For a list of all upcoming archives SANS webcasts, visit sans.org/webcast. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.